The German shell screams through the morning air and slams into Iron Betty's left track with the sound of thunder, sending 30 tons of British steel spinning into the wall of a French bakery. But Sergeant William Hartley isn't retreating, not when 40 of his countrymen are trapped in that schoolhouse with enemy panzers closing in for the kill. Welcome to War Stories by the Campfire, where we share inspirational true war stories from history's greatest moments of courage. Comment below and let us know where you're tuning in from tonight. Picture yourself settling in by a warm fire as we journey back to May 1940 to the beaches of Dunkirk, France. The British Expeditionary Force finds itself trapped, with the English Channel at their backs and the German war machine closing in from all sides. This is about a tank crew that refused to abandon their brothers in arms. Sergeant William Hartley commanded a Matilda II tank painted in dull green with mud caked on its tracks. His crew called her Iron Betty. At 19, Corporal James Mitchell was his gunner with the steadiest hands Hartley had ever seen. Private Tommy Welsh, their loader from Yorkshire's coal mines, could sling shells faster than most men could breathe. Driver Eddie Barnes could make Iron Betty dance despite her 30 tons of steel armor. The morning of May 27th brought desperate news. German panzers had broken through, and British forces were falling back toward the evacuation beaches. Hartley's orders were heartbreaking. Hold the line as long as possible, then destroy the tank and make for the beach. But Welsh spotted something through his periscope that made his blood run cold. 40 British infantry were pinned down in a bombed-out school building. German machine gun nests had them trapped, and enemy tanks were moving in for the kill. Hartley faced an impossible choice: follow orders and fall back, or risk everything to save those trapped soldiers. He looked at his crew, these young men who had become closer than brothers. Without a word, Mitchell was already training the main gun toward the German positions. Welsh had armor-piercing rounds ready. Barnes was revving the engine. Iron Betty lurched forward, her tracks digging deep furrows as she charged toward the enemy. German machine gunners spotted them immediately, and tracer rounds began bouncing off their armor like deadly fireflies. Hartley's voice came calm over the intercom. Target the machine gun nest at 2 o'clock, Mitchell. The Matilda's 2-pounder gun spoke with authority, and the German position disappeared in smoke and debris. But 3 German Panzer III tanks were moving to intercept them, their longer guns already swinging toward Iron Betty. What followed was a deadly game through the rubble-strewn streets. Barnes used every bit of cover, ducking behind buildings and weaving through narrow alleys, while Mitchell engaged target after target. The German tanks were faster, but Iron Betty's armor was thicker. The first German panzer tried to flank them. Mitchell's shot took it clean through the turret, and the enemy tank rolled to a stop, smoke pouring from its hatches. The second panzer got off a shot that rang against their frontal armor like a giant bell, but the steel held firm. But the third German tank nearly ended their story. As they rounded a corner, the enemy panzer was waiting, gun trained at their vulnerable side armor. Time seemed to slow as Hartley watched the muzzle flash bloom. The shot took Iron Betty in the left track, spinning her violently into the bakery wall. For a moment, all was silent except for ringing ears and the acrid smell of cordite. Then Barnes was back on the controls, backing them out while Mitchell searched for the German tank. There it was, moving for the killing shot. But the German commander had exposed his own flank. Mitchell's shot was perfect, striking just below the turret ring. The German panzer shuddered once and went still. With the threat eliminated, Hartley could see the British infantry beginning to move. But Iron Betty was hurt badly. Her left track damaged, losing oil pressure. She could still move, but not for long. The radio brought devastating news. The evacuation was ahead of schedule, but German forces were closing the corridor. Any units not at the beach within 4 hours would be cut off permanently. Again, Hartley faced an impossible choice. Iron Betty could probably make it to the beach if they left immediately. But those 40 rescued soldiers were on foot, wounded, and would never make it in time. More Germans were coming. Without hesitation, Hartley decided Iron Betty would become a rearguard, buying time for the infantry to reach safety. For 3 hours, they fought a running battle through the French countryside, always moving, always shooting, always protecting the column of walking wounded behind them. Welsh later said those were the longest 3 hours of his life. They faced everything the Germans could throw at them: tanks, anti-tank guns, aircraft, and infantry. Iron Betty took hit after hit, but somehow kept moving. Her armor was scarred and blackened, one periscope shattered, steam rising from her overheated engine, but she never stopped fighting. Cresting the final hill before Dunkirk beach, Hartley could see the miracle unfolding below. Hundreds of small boats, fishing vessels, pleasure craft, tugboats, lifeboats were ferrying soldiers from beach to larger ships offshore. Royal Navy destroyers stood guard, their guns blazing at German aircraft. But Iron Betty's war was almost over. Her engine was failing, and German forces were massing for one final assault on the evacuation perimeter. Hartley could see enemy tanks moving through the woods, preparing to attack the beach itself. As his crew prepared to abandon their faithful tank, Hartley made one last decision that would define their story forever. Instead of simply destroying Iron Betty to prevent capture, they would use her one final time to buy precious minutes for the evacuation. Barnes coaxed every last bit of power from the dying engine as they positioned themselves at the narrow road leading to the beach. Mitchell loaded their last armor-piercing round while Welsh prepared the demolition charges. The German assault came as the sun set, painting the sky the color of fire. 6 enemy tanks rolled down that narrow road, confident they could sweep aside any remaining resistance and break through to the beach where thousands of British soldiers still waited for rescue. They had not counted on Iron Betty making her last stand. Mitchell's final shot disabled the lead German tank, blocking the road completely. The following Panzers were forced to spread out across soft ground, where they became easy targets for the Royal Navy destroyers offshore. For 20 precious minutes, one damaged British tank held off an entire German armored column. When the demolition charges finally detonated, Iron Betty died as she had lived, protecting her countrymen. Hartley and his crew made it to the beach just as one of the last boats was preparing to leave. As they sailed across the channel toward England, they could see the glow of fires on the French coast behind them. But they also knew that 40 British soldiers who should have died in that schoolhouse were aboard ships around them, heading home to their families. And hundreds more had made it safely to the boats, because one tank crew decided that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were hopeless. The evacuation of Dunkirk saved over 338,000 Allied soldiers, allowing Britain to continue the fight against Nazi Germany. But it was made possible by countless acts of individual courage, like 4 young men in a tank called Iron Betty, who refused to abandon their brothers in arms. Sergeant William Hartley survived the war and returned to his hometown in Lancashire, where he worked as a mechanic until retirement. He rarely spoke about those days in France, but when he did, he always said the same thing. We didn't think of ourselves as heroes. We were just doing our job, looking after our mates. So there you have it, one tank crew's stand at Dunkirk, where ordinary men did extraordinary things when their country needed them most. That shell we heard screaming through the air at the beginning? That was the moment Iron Betty took her worst hit, but refused to break, just like the brave men inside her who turned certain defeat into legendary courage. Did you enjoy tonight's story? If so, please hit that like button and subscribe. It's completely free and helps us bring you these incredible true stories from history. And here's a question for you. If you had been in Sergeant Hartley's position, facing that choice between following orders and saving your fellow soldiers, what would you have done? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, this has been War Stories by the Campfire. We release new videos every day, so make sure you're locked and loaded by hitting that subscribe button for your daily dose of real war stories from throughout history. Sleep well, and remember the courage of those who came before us.